Am I just asked for questions, or?
There we go.
Well, somebody asked me, what's your favorite part of the Constitution?
Yeah, tell them about your favorite part.
Favorite part of the Constitution is
Let's open them up.
Article 1, Section 1, Sentence 1.
And let's read it together.
Yes.
Which is on page...
Page 1. No, it isn't.
it's a little bit after that. Oh, oh, you're right. It's page 1.
Yes.
Page 1, Article 1, Section 1.
All right, let's read it. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All right, now how many people don't know the meaning of the word all? I think some of our esteemed congressmen and senators, I don't think they understand that. Or they've never read it, or they've decided to go ahead and violate it anyhow. So all measures, all legislative powers herein granted shall be elected in the Congress, shall be vested in the Congress. Now, how many of you have heard of an executive order? The president can't get something done, so he just writes an executive order, and that becomes a law. Is that right? No. So the very first sentence in the Constitution has been marginally, seriously emasculated, right? I'll tell you a story about something that happened in, before we went back into Iraq the second time. The House of Representatives was meeting, and Ron Paul, who was a good friend of mine and no longer in the House of Representatives, but he was a wonder while he was there. He was all very much alone in some respects. He stood up and he said, "Mr. Chairman, I have a motion." He said, "I move that we declare war on Iraq, because we're going to go into Iraq, and I'm going to vote against my own measure, but I don't think we can ignore the Constitution that says all powers, legislative powers, including declarations of war, shall be in the House of Representatives." In other words, the president can't decide to send us into Iraq. It's got to be a vote of Congress. If it's a war, we've got to go. That's Article 1, Section 8. Only Congress has the power to declare war. Well, what happened then? The leader of the committee that they were discussing this was the Foreign Affairs Committee, headed by a congressman named Henry Hyde from Chicago. And he stood up and he said, "Ron," he said, that part of the Constitution has been bypassed. It's not rule anymore, right? We can go ahead and do what we want to do here. What was the word he used?
Anachronistic.
Anachronistic, all right? You know what anything is? Have you ever heard that word, anachronistic? Right? What does it mean? It means time passed by and it doesn't count anymore, right? So I got a couple of people in Henry Hyde's district. He was the one who said that Article 1, Section 1 was now an anachronism. And I had them write to Henry Hyde and say, is the part of the Constitution that says you're going to be paid for your service, is that an anachronism also? As you might expect, those people didn't get any answer from Henry Hyde, right? But that kind of thing goes on all the time. So I know Mrs. Harper has a favorite part of the Constitution. You want to tell them about yours?
Well, I think we just covered it, but
okay, well,
I'd be glad to take questions any other time or questions about that. In fact, we had a little debate going here.
Mr. McManus, tell them about the end of Article 1, Section 8, where it says to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper.
Necessary and proper.
And that, from your fallacy speech.
Okay, we got Go to page 6 in the Constitution,
Right there.
in the booklet. I got it here.
Yeah, it's actually the almost to the bottom of page 7, campers.
All right. But look over it on page 6, you'll see Section 8. This is Article 1, Section 8. And it's the different things that Congress is given power to do, right? They can borrow money on the credit of the United States to regulate commerce with foreign nations. They can coin money. Coin money is coins, not pieces of paper, right? Coin money, it's a strong word. Right? Provide for the punishment of counterfeiting, establish post offices, and so forth. Now, if we go over to the right-hand page there, page 7, we see a paragraph just next to the last paragraph. It says, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers.
Let's have them read that.
All right, everybody, please read that. Help me out here. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. I stop right there. Most congressmen, they do this all the time. You write to them and you say, where did you get the power to do this? And they will send you back a note saying the necessary and proper clause. But the necessary and proper clause says it's only useful for carrying into execution the foregoing powers in Article 1, Section 8. I think there are 17 of them. One of them is to provide for a navy, make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, organizing a militia, right? And so on, and to declare war. All right? Now, who knows when it was the last time the Congress of the United States declared war? Anybody want to guess? Yes. World War II. All right? The Japanese bombed, good for you. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and the Congress got together and said that was a warlike act. We've got to respond. So they declared war on Japan. But Japan and Italy and Germany had a pact. And that said that if any one of us goes to war, we all go to war together. So what happened immediately was that Germany and Italy declared war on the United States within days of the declaration by Congress. And then Congress had to come back and say, okay, you've declared war on us, we'll declare war on you. And so just in a few days, it was about 5 days, I think, we were in war in the Pacific, we were war in Europe, and even war in Africa, because part of the undoing of the Hitler movement was done in northern Africa. So, all right, go back to that part. It says, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. What are the foregoing powers? Those are the ones that are listed. I think there's 17 of them. And one of them is to declare war. Now, have we had a declaration of war in the Korean War in the 1950s? Nope. Did we have a declaration of war in the Vietnam War in the 60s and into the 70s? Nope. Did we have a declaration of war against Iraq or Afghanistan? Nope. 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 Haven't had a declaration of war since we got into the United Nations, and that's the key. I gave a talk here on the United Nations last year at the camp, and I was asked to come back and give the talk again, the same talk. So you're going to hear more about that when I give the talk on Friday. So the necessary and proper clause, any congressman who refers to that as authority, go ahead and make law on some subject, is totally wrong, and he should be called on it, or he should be instructed on it. I suspect that there are some of them who don't even know the distinction there, that it says the foregoing powers. So, but my favorite sentence is still the first, Article 1, Section 1, Sentence 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States. Executive orders by presidents that take power over the entire nation are totally unconstitutional. Does the president have the right to issue an executive order about something? Only if it's to the federal employees. It's like he's the head of a corporation. The head of a corporation can certainly put out orders to the people who work for him, take the paycheck from him, right? And the same thing applies here. So an executive order, if it's limited to just the president's helpers, the different cabinet positions and the bureaucracies and so forth, then it's proper. But if it directs the entire nation or has consequences for the entire nation, it's totally wrong. Right?
Let's go on to Article 6, because that was from your speech of fallacies as well. For example, Mr. Shurtleff can issue an executive order that all lights shall be out by 11 p.m. However, Mr. Shurtleff cannot say everybody in America. That's not a legitimate executive order. But we did not cover Article 6, and we don't have a class coming up on Article 6. And you talked about that during your film Revolution by Treaty.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And we'll have them read along the sections that you want to cover.
All right, Article 6 on page 15. All right, second paragraph. Everybody join with me. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the constitutional laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. All right? So treaty law is limited. Treaty law does not supersede the Constitution. But there are people in Congress, and they have over the years, said that treaty law does supersede the Constitution. One of them was Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, right, in the Eisenhower administration. They do not. Treaties, I think it was Madison who said, if treaties have no boundaries, then we have no country. You know? Yeah, something like that. Right? So, if I was going to talk about treaty law and all of that, I would have boned up a little bit.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Tell them about democracy.
Democracy. You know, there was another debate last night. The Democrat candidates, there are 24 of them, I guess. 12 of them got together last night, and I think 12 more will be Friday night. And they call it a debate, and it's not. It's an audition. They're auditioning to become the emperor, right? The emperor. In my view, there are only 5 different kinds of government. Right? You can have a monarchy or a dictatorship. That's one. You can have an oligarchy, and that's where you have just a few important people, self-important people, who rule. You can have a democracy, which is ruled by the majority. You can have a republic, which is the rule by law. Or you can have anarchy, which is no government. And I think all possible governments are mentioned in those 5, right? Anarchy is a short transition from a good government to a bad government. And we see it happen all the time. It's happening right now in Venezuela. It's been happening in Hong Kong, right? Right? So monarchy or dictatorship is really never just a king or a prime minister, just the one person. No, he's always got a whole tribe of assistants and so forth. And so it's not really, rule by one doesn't really exist. It's ruled by a few, and that's the elite. And that's what we call an oligarchy. And that's a very permanent type of government, unfortunately. So that we're down to discussing democracy and republic. All right? We get the word democracy from the Greek language. Demos and kratian. Demos, people, kratian, to rule. And what that says is whatever you want to do with government, you put it up to the people and you let the people decide, majority rules, and so on, and you get the worst kind of government you could possibly. Some of the democracies in history have been absolutely horrible, right? But our founding fathers didn't give us a democracy. And anybody who says that this country is a democracy is either a fool or a traitor. We are a republic. You pledge allegiance to the flag and to the democracy for which it stands? No. To the republic for which it stands. So the word democracy came from the Greeks. The word republic came from the Latins, from the Romans. And republic is made up of two parts, res publica. You know what the publica part means. The res part is thing. The public thing, the law. Okay? Our founding fathers, not one of them favored democracy. Not one of them. And if you go to the Federalist Papers, you can read James Madison's famous statement where he said, democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have found incompatible with the rights of freedom, and in general are as short in their lives as they are violent in their deaths. Right? James Madison, the father of the Constitution. Nobody knew it better than he did. Right? So when you hear these politicians get up and talk about our wonderful democracy, if you want to throw up, you go right ahead.
What can we do? So, you know, Fox News, Carlson Tucker, every show, it's like six. Do we write? Do we say? What do you think is a...
Well, you start with the people in your own home, and then you go to your neighbors, and then you start a little group in town, what I call a chapter of the John Birch Society, and then you... where I go to church is a group of people that meet afterwards for a cup of coffee, and over the 2 years I've been going to this particular church, I've been handing them a little piece of a reprint of something or a letter that I wrote or something like that. They're all getting excited. What do you got for us today? Everybody likes what I'm sending them, you know? So I suggested the other day, I said, why don't we hire a hall on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, and I'll come and I'll give a talk on what our country's all about. And they all said, great, let's do it. I'll bring the kids. We'll have a good meeting. So I'm looking forward to doing that. That would be good.
Article 4, Mr. McManus. I've heard you in many of your speeches refer to folks who, if you will, they're breaking and entering into our country, and we call them invaders. And Article 4, Section 4. Do you need it? Here it is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So top of page 15, please. Campers, top of page 15. Article 4, Section 4.
Read along with me. The United States. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, not a democracy, right? And shall protect each of them against invasion. Oh, you mean that they even expected that there might be an invasion of our country? Well, if you got 20 million people coming across the southern border looking for handouts, if that's not an invasion, I don't know what it is. We have been invaded by illegal immigrants, and it's the duty of the federal government of the United States to stop that. Right? The Democrats in Congress want it because they expect all those people coming across the border will vote Democrat when they get the chance to vote. And some of them will get the vote even though they don't deserve to have the vote. So there is in the Constitution of the United States the authority to repel an invasion. All right, what else are we going to talk about, Norman? I don't know. I didn't prepare for this.
That has a question for Mr. McManus. I've got one, but...
Well, go ahead. What do you got?
If Congress doesn't act, doesn't what you just said, can't the president act if Congress doesn't? Since it says the United States shall.
Oh,
Protect from invasion.
in that particular instance, yes.
Okay, so
But not in other,
stating that,
not in other things. The president can't usurp power that belongs to Congress, even if Congress doesn't use proper power, no.
okay, but if there's an executive order saying this is an emergency, we have to take care of it, the president can't act to stop invaders if Congress doesn't.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. McManus, on page 23, Campers, page 23, amendments 9 and 10, IX is 9, X is 10. I think everybody knows that, but just in case you don't know.
The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's the Bill of Rights. Now, the Bill of Rights was not part of the original Constitution as written, but there were some people in some states that said they would not ratify the Constitution without a Bill of Rights. And so they made a promise that we get the Constitution ratified and it becomes the law of the land, then we'll add to it a Bill of Rights. And you know what? Back then, those people kept their promise. And that hasn't always been done, but they kept their promise. So I've always said that Amendment number 1, where you've got the guarantee of freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of petition, and so forth, and Amendment 2, the right to keep and bear arms, I said, most of them are thou shalt nots. They're like the 10 Commandments. Government shall not do this. Government shall not do that, all right? And I always say right up all the way to the 10th Amendment that says if we forgot anything, you can't do that either. And that's essentially what the Bill of Rights is really all about. Although Catherine Clark might disagree with me about that.
Well, perhaps. Let's have the campers read Article 10, Amendment 10 together. Amendment
10, page 23. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Right? In other words, if we forgot anything, you can't do anything. You can't do it either. Right?
One time when you were, I guess about 30 years old, thereabouts, Robert Welsh, who was the founder of the John Birch Society that Mr. McManus was working for, Robert Welsh was asked about the low point of the John Birch Society. Do you want to tell the campers about that?
Well, I graduated from college in 1960, went in the Marine Corps. After 3 years in the Marine Corps, I got a job as an electronics engineer, and I was doing pretty well in that, I guess. I joined the Birch Society, and then they asked me to join the staff. I actually joined the staff at the Society on August 1st of 1966. Well, years later, I was with Mr. Welsh, the founder of the John Birch Society, and he was having a press conference with a couple of decent small-town newspaper people out in Colorado. And one of the guys asked a penetrating question. He said, what was the low point in the history of the society to date? This was in the early 1970s. So Robert Welsh kind of scratched his head a little bit, and he said, well, it was probably the summer of 1966. And he said the accumulated smears of the society had taken their toll, and recruiting was down, and the sale of books was down. And so, yeah, he said, around the middle of the summer of 1966. Well, later in the day, I told him, I said, Mr. Welsh, I was very interested in your answer to that question, because I joined your staff on August 1st of 1966. And he said, I told you it was our low point. He had a great sense of humor. He was a wonderful man. He and I are pictured here on the front of the book. That's me with look at the colored hair I had there. My goodness. And a lot more of it. And that's Robert Welsh. He died in 1985. No. Yeah.
January
85. Right. We have a couple of copies of this book if anybody wants one. There's some back there. We have to charge $20 because it costs a lot to print that big a book. And it cost me almost 2 years to write it, so that was another part of it.
And let it also be noted that if someone were to purchase the book, I bet Mr. McManus would sign it for no charge.
No extra charge.
Do you want to tell them about what you write about every issue in the?
Well, every issue of the magazine, I write the column called Quotes, Quick Quotes, right? And I scan newspapers. I'm a newspaper junkie, as I mentioned, and I get things off the internet and so forth. So I'm constantly finding pithy quotes that I think are helpful to the people who you can get a sense of the entire subject sometimes just in a single quote from somebody. So what do we got here in this issue, huh? Harvard law professor defends Trump. That's news. Here's something that really bothers me. The Chinese officials have taken control of the Catholic Church in China. Oh, yeah. The communist officials, right? Yeah. So there's a quote about that too, right? Yeah. Right. So I do that for every issue, and it's become a kind of it's a very positive thing. I enjoy doing it. So I wanted to mention too this letter. This letter appeared in the Boston Globe just a few days ago. Well, a few weeks ago, the 8th of July. And it's written by a guy who was a soldier in Afghanistan. And he points out that we are now in the 18th year of a war in Afghanistan that was never declared. You know? And he's upset about it. He doesn't know that NATO is now running the war in Afghanistan. Right? So I sent him a copy of a letter that was written by John Negroponte, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. He wrote it on United Nations stationery, and he wrote to tell them that the invasion of Iraq in 2003, he said, the actions being taken are scrutinized under existing council resolutions, including Resolution 1, 2, 2. So who did we get the authority from to invade Afghanistan? We got it from the United Nations. Right? There's a principle involved in all of this, and it's very simple. One seeks authorization from a superior, not an inferior. We go to the United Nations and ask them if it's okay if we invade Iraq. That's where we are. Right? We went to war in Korea in 1950. They didn't even call it war. They called it a police action. It was war. There were 50,000 casualties, that's for sure. We went to war in Vietnam. The war in Korea, incidentally, has never been settled. It's still in progress. It could break out again tomorrow. We went to war in Vietnam, which is the first war that our country ever lost. Total defeat. Everybody left. The poor Vietnamese people. I don't know, any of you remember seeing them scrambling to get on the helicopter to leave? You know, it was pitiful. It brought tears to my eyes about what we had done to those people. Right? So then we go to Iraq. First time and then a second time. Now we're in Afghanistan. 18 years. 18. And Congress puts up with this. Congress should tell the president, hey, fish or cut bait. Right? Get out of there. Right? So I wrote a letter to the guy who didn't have that information, and I sent him a copy of that letter from John Negroponte. And I hope I hear from him. I don't know whether I will. I had to send it through the newspaper because they didn't give an address for him.
So,
okay.